What is the solution to the controversy raging across the country over books in public school libraries? Join Richard Ebeling and me in this week's Libertarian Angle as we examine that question. Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation. This is this week's Libertarian Angle, the show, as you all know, that brings you the libertarian perspective on the burning issues of the day in a principled, uncompromising fashion. I'm joined, as I am every week, by Richard Ebeling, professor of economics at the Citadel, professor par excellence, I should say. Richard, good to see you again.
It's good to see you too, and to be with our viewers and listeners once more.
Yeah, good to have you all back. And if you're new to the Future of Freedom Foundation, come and visit us at fff.org. Subscribe to our FFF Daily, our monthly journal. Take a look at 32 years of principled arguments on libertarianism. So, Richard, big controversy in the educational arena. Surprise, surprise, but it's raging all across the country, especially in the context of the political races that were going on yesterday, the governor's race here in Virginia. But the governor of Texas weighed into the controversy. What it involves is books in the libraries of the public school systems all across America. That there's a large group of people that are complaining about the book selections in those public libraries. Governor Abbott in Texas wrote a letter to the Association of School Boards saying you all need to review the books in every public school across the country, every school district, to make sure that the wrong books are not being selected. And then over here in Virginia, big controversy over in Virginia Beach and other communities about what they were putting in the public library. And it all seems to orient around sexual matters, sexual orientation, race relations, the history of racism in America and so forth. That's what's generating the controversy. And I think we can all agree, Richard, that there are certain books that everyone would agree with, or, don't really have a purpose in any school, public or private. But naturally, when government has this authority, there's going to be a broad range of books where there's going to be a difference of opinion. And that's what's going on now, is that you've got one faction saying, oh, our books are okay to put in there. And then the other faction, no, your books are pornographic, they're illegitimate. And so it's another example of the educational system, which is run by the state. And we've been saying this for 32 years, that you can spend your time arguing over how the state should run its educational system, but these battles are intractable. How do you resolve them? I mean, the only way you're going to resolve them is through majority vote, through getting your people elected to the school board, and then they ban the books that they don't like, and there's always going to be people unhappy. And the whole issue is politicized because it's a political issue. Public schooling is a political institution. It's a governmental institution. We've been pointing that out the entire time we've been here at FFF. It's really a socialist institution. I don't think you could find a better example of a socialist institution. I generally call it Army Light, because it resembles the Army, which of course is a socialist institution. You've got central planning, where government officials are centrally planning the education of hundreds or thousands of children, whether it's at a local level, school board, state level, national level, Department of Education. You've got compulsory attendance laws. They're like a draft where you're coercing parents to send their kids into this institution. The purpose is, of course, regimentation, deference to authority, defer to the authority of the government when they send out their missives as to what they're doing. And then, of course, they're controlling the textbooks and the teachers and the curriculum. You've got a classic socialist system. And so when you have these battles like, well, what should they wear? Should they wear uniforms or not? Or should they be required to do the Pledge of Allegiance or not? It's irreconcilable. And so there's only one solution to this whole thing in a liberty sense, and that's separating school and state. We've been making that case, gosh, I think 1990, our first year of publication for our monthly journal, and that's why it's so important that there be libertarians out here that are not interested in just reforming the system, which is what this is all about. Let's reform the public school system, but are interested in achieving liberty, which is what separation of school and state is all about. What do you think, Richard?
Well, you know, if I can just sort of pick up on some of the themes that you started with here. A good part of the most recent controversy in the schools around the country has been the issue of what will be included in the curriculum in grammar schools, junior and high schools. And right now, the hot issue in some areas has been the idea of critical race theory. What is the history of America? Did it originate in 1619 with the arrival of the first slaves from Africa? And therefore, America has always been institutionally, politically, socially, and psychologically a race-based country? Or was America founded in its ideals in 1776 with the Declaration of Independence? Would the real America stand up? And there has been a big push for a good number of years to push that former one, that America's founding idea is not individual liberty and self-government, but a race-based society originating in slavery. And this has become a hot topic because it's basically is what is America about? And therefore, what are the American people about? And this is no doubt an important subject. But the difficulty is, along the lines that you've just been raising, Jacob, is that whether it be those on the left who are pushing this new agenda, or whether it be the conservatives and those running often for Republican office, obviously, in one level of government or not, or another, is that they're saying is that, well, we don't agree with this interpretation of American history that is being now attempted to be foisted on our children. So what we want to do is we want a governor in place. We want members of the state legislature in place. We want people on the school boards that will impose what we consider to be the correct interpretation of American history, instead of theirs, ours. In other words, it's the dilemma that when it is a monopoly institution, a form of socialism, as you were saying, in which it is funded by the state primarily, it is mandatory attendance, not only mandatory attendance, but because of the districting, almost always where your kid has to go to school, that is the specific school, you basically have a situation in which it is a form of imposed central planning, in which those who gain control of the legislature and the school boards dictate what all students, and therefore what all parents must accept, the students will be learning. Content, curriculum, pedagogy, and so on. Now, as long as you have this kind of a situation, there is no solution, because it's always waiting for the next round of elections to see if you can defeat the side that won last time. It's an unending school warfare. The only solution to this, as you were suggesting, would be the privatization of education. You notice that in all of these elections that have been popularized, including the one in your state of Virginia for the governorship, and it appears that the Republican candidate has beaten the Democrat. And the Democrat had said, he was quoted in several of the articles, that he thinks that the curriculum should be dictated by the teachers. And then, of course, in the last days of the election, he says, and I want to spend $2 billion more on giving public school teachers more salary. Talk about bribing, trying to get votes. But what is the other side? No, parents should have a say. But when it's parents having a say, it's really saying is, we think we're the majority and we should dictate what has to be the curriculum in all the schools. But if the institutions of learning, whether it be the grammar schools, the junior high schools, the high schools, obviously all the way through college as well, were fully privatized, all of these issues would disappear. I know a subject that's often close to your heart, separation of church and state, as sort of a template for a lot of these issues. We don't see these types of politicized issues in religion anymore. There was a time when kings determine the faith of his subjects. There have been many European countries, some still, in which churches are subsidized by the state, and you have to declare your confession, which in German is the declaration of what denomination and faith you belong to, because that affects how much government money goes to particular denominations. Now, all of this has the residues of continuing government conflict of who's going to be funded, by how much, for what purposes, with what faith. Now, if this was all privatized, it goes away, like separation of church and state. We don't fight over, is this Protestant denomination correct compared to Catholicism, compared to Judaism, compared to Islam, compared to Buddhism, compared to Hinduism? No, we don't worry about that. Everyone follows the faith that their own conscience leads them to, or no faith at all. And each person, guided by their faith, give those tithings or contributions that their conscience dictates them to feel is the right thing to do, or none at all. And there is no politics about it. There is tolerance, there is plurality, and there is inclusiveness, diversity and inclusiveness. Everyone follows their own beliefs on religion. Everyone funds it as they think appropriate with fellow people who share their faith. And government is kept out of it. And nobody feels threatened. No one feels that they're being forced. Nobody feels as if something is being imposed on them or their children, because there is no politics in religion in this form. But in education, there is. Until we separate education and the state, as we've separated religion and the state, these controversies will continue. And notice, even the, quote, staunchest conservative candidates or outspoken advocates in these most recent controversies and debates and arguments, to my knowledge, maybe you've read one, Jacob, but to my knowledge, not one of them in these mainstream discussions and debates and elections has called for the privatization of education. So our conservative cousins, if I can put it that way, yes, classical liberals as we view ourselves, not one of them sees that the answer is getting government out of schooling and education. And until that is followed and discovered and pursued, this is an unending controversy. As I said, the battle is then renewed in the next election cycle. And it is a never-ending conflict and battle.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, here are people spending so much time, energy, and money arguing over whether there should be this book or that book in the library, when the debate really should be, what role should the state have with respect to education? I mean, that should be the debate topic all across America. Why is the state involved in education? As you point out, if we had a survey saying, should the state be involved in religion? I think everybody would say no. At least most everybody would say no. That, okay, there's people that don't send their kids to church. Okay, there's people that worship Satan. Okay, there's people that are Catholics instead of Protestants, or Jews instead of Muslims, and so forth. But people would say, we don't want to make this subject to democratic vote. This is a fundamental right. Your religion is a fundamental right. You decide for yourself. Why shouldn't education be in the exact same category? Why isn't that just a fundamental right that should not be subject to democratic vote? It should just be separated out from the state itself. And if we could get that debate going, now all of a sudden we're talking about liberty instead of some kind of warmed over serfdom. The analogy I like to use, Richard, is slavery. You know, if we lived in 1855 Alabama, we could devote our lives to reforming slavery. We could organize a 501c3, if they'd had income taxation back then, which of course they didn't have. Americans didn't believe in that either. But if we organize an organization together of libertarians, and we said, okay, our mission here at this organization is going to be to reform slavery, make it more palatable. We're going to get laws enacted providing for fewer lashings, or maybe even no lashings anymore, and better work conditions, and better health care, and better food. Well, the slaves, they probably would have been grateful for that. and certainly it would have improved the lives of the slaves. But there's one big problem with it, and every slave would have known this. It's not freedom. It's just a warmed over version of slavery. And that's what all these debates are about, that as long as you leave the state in control of education, it's just a serfdom. And it's a serfdom where people are getting indoctrinated. I mean, there's a reason why people defer to the state when it comes to interventions like in Afghanistan or Iraq or whatever, because they've been indoctrinated with this notion of don't question, don't challenge us at a fundamental level, support the troops and so forth, no matter how big the debacle is. And so once you take it out of that realm and you raise it to the higher realm of should the state be involved in education at all, the arguments change. And the same applies with like school vouchers. You've got conservatives that spend their lives arguing for school vouchers. And in the beginning, Milton Friedman, who was the original guy advocating vouchers, he was very upfront. He says, well, this is the way to get the state out of education. And he even took me to task once in an article, which was kind of an honor. You got a Nobel laureate that was taking me to task because I was saying, no, the way to do this is just get the state out of it. And he says, oh, no, vouchers are the way to do this. Well, he was wrong. I mean, you've got vouchers in Milwaukee now for 30-something years or something, and there's no evidence at all that vouchers have led to the eradication of the state from education. And voucher proponents now don't even make that argument. They say, oh, no, vouchers will improve the public school system. Well, you can spend your life doing that, which is really just trying to improve serfdom, like trying to improve slavery. But if you want freedom, then you've got to identify what's the infringement on freedom, and what greater infringement on freedom, or at least one of the greatest infringements on freedom, is this whole notion of forcing kids into state schools or subjecting them to the state educational system. I mean, that's abuse to the max. You can spend your life trying to reform it with vouchers and prayer in public schools or the right books in the library, but it's not freedom any more than slavery reform would have been freedom for slaves. If you want freedom, now if you don't want freedom, then hey, just keep doing what you're doing. Just keep fighting over a warmed over version of serfdom. But if you want freedom, then it's necessary to join up with those of us that are saying, let's raise the level of debate here. Should the state be involved in education at all? Should education be subject to majority vote? Should the books that kids are exposed to be subjected to majority vote, or should this be just a decision of the parents? Because in a free market educational system, the kind we're advocating, Richard, people, let's say they have their kids in a particular school that has books on race relations or sexual orientation that they don't like. They don't have to run for the school board to get it changed. They just walk. They just leave that school. They go over to another school that shares their values, their book selections, and so forth. Or they decide to educate their kids in some other way, hiring tutors or homeschooling or whatever. But the nice thing about the free market is it provides a multiplicity of options for people to exercise without getting into these political fights, battles that we see in this kind of a fight here. Everything's politicized. In a free market system, as you pointed out, in religion, we don't see those battles taking place. And that's what would happen with a free market educational system, is that you would get rid of all these politicized battles and people would be able to choose the educational vehicle that best supports their particular value system.
Yeah, if I could just add to this, because maybe some viewer or listener listening will say, well, I understand separating education from the state. You take politics out of it. You diffuse a lot of these heated controversies and conflicts that we see over what Johnny and Sally are going to learn in school. But could we really have a private schooling system? Will it work? And let me just say, as sort of a footnote to that question, to the one we're more focused on, is that, well, we assume that people will get shoes for themselves and their children through a private market of shoe manufacturers and retail outlets, clothes, a roof over our head, the food on our table. We never worry that if government doesn't mandate that parents send their children to a place 3 times a day where government will give them meals, parents will let their children starve. Or if we didn't mandate that children had to send the parents had to send their children periodically to a government-owned shoe store where the government, with subsidized tax money, would assure that kiddies got shoes, that children, dependent purely upon their parents, might go barefoot. We don't worry about these things because we know that in a market, people take responsibility for themselves and their families. We also know that people are in less fortunate circumstances than ourselves, or fall upon hard times not of their own making. And there's charity, there's philanthropy, there's good works of a wide variety going on in our society. And as far as the curriculum and the quality of the education, we take for granted that each and every year we expect to get nicer, better, and less expensive flat screen televisions, nicer and better smartphones, and getting more for your dollar and competitively at a lower real price after you adjust for inflation, for instance. We expect to get a shirt that is more wrinkle-free, and that's all due to the competition of the sellers of these goods having to do better than their rivals to capture our consumer business. Why would we not expect the same, Jacob, in the education market? If schooling was private, then parents are deciding which school their children or son and daughter will attend, which means they have to then, the suppliers of that education have to compete for the consumer dollar. This is what we're going to teach Johnny and Sally. This is our curriculum. This is our pedagogy, how we try to make it interesting and meaningful and relevant for your son or daughter so they want to learn. These are the subjects that we're emphasizing that are both consistent with your values and outlooks, but also will help your son or daughter prepare themselves for an adult life after they've graduated from school completely, in earning a living, having a sense of meaning and purpose for themselves. And I would suggest that over time, as we assume with everything else in the marketplace, you'd see more variety, better quality, and at lower real cost because of the competitive rivalry of gaining no revenue other than capturing market share, in this case, parents and their students looking for schools for them to attend. That would be the solution to it. So we would take politics out of it. We would have a wide variety of schools with improving quality at lower cost to the parents. And for those who are concerned, listen, I've been teaching at universities and colleges all my life in different places. There has not been one, including my present employment at the Citadel here in Charleston, South Carolina, that many students would not be here if not for the charitable giving of grants, scholarships, other types of financial supports that alumni or people who share the values and see the importance of that institution give money. For instance, I'm sitting in an office right now, Jacob, in a new building, a School of Business building on the Citadel campus. This cost millions upon millions of dollars to build. So there are up-to-date, state-of-the-art classrooms, very nice offices for the faculty, for students to be taking the classes and to be learning cutting-edge things, both subject matter and technology, to go out into the world of business. This building and everything in it was financed primarily by 2 successful businessmen in the greater Charleston area who themselves were Citadel graduates. This didn't require government tax money. This didn't require some type of a subsidy. This was the generosity of people who believed that education was worthwhile and wanted to help support it. Think if government was out of education and all the tax dollars that government now takes from us for grammar school, junior high school, and so on, were back in the pockets of the people who had earned it. You could afford to pay tuitions, and more comfortable people would have greater wealth out of which they could be generous for good causes, including helping those attend better schools if they have the interest and the potential to be there. So I think that on both the focus that we've been taking and just the pragmatic ability of the system to work, and better than the current system, the freedom argument wins hands down.
Yeah, I'm glad you raised that, because I mean, how often do we get that question of what about the poor? What about the poor? And if you had state churching systems instead of state educational systems, and we libertarians came along and said, hey, why don't we separate church and state, there inevitably would have been people saying, where will the poor go to church? The poor won't have any churches to go to. The churches will only be for the rich. Well, look around. The poor have no problem going to church. I don't think I've ever heard of a church in America that denies admission to people because they're not donating. I mean, they rely on donations, but they don't exclude people that don't donate. And so with a private educational system, there's two factors that you're emphasizing here. One is the free market factor, that entrepreneurs, they see a market among the poor. For example, in the food industry, I mean, the poor are not starving to death. There's an entire market out there that is oriented toward the poorer classes, of selling them fresh vegetables, fresh fruits. It's not as good as perhaps as organic at Whole Foods, but it's healthy, it's fresh, and it's oriented toward that market. You have the same thing in the housing market. That before HUD got into to distort everything, there was people providing low-cost housing for the poor, not out of their the generosity of their heart. They're doing it for the profit motive. They saw that this is a big market, and that's what would happen in education. That there would be entrepreneurs out there providing educational vehicles for people in the lower economic strata to make a profit. But what about those that truly need? Well, as you point out, Richard, we've got to restore this faith and freedom again that Americans once had, that you can rely on the generosity of the well-to-do people to provide scholarships and fellowships. I mean, we see this on a local basis where the local service organizations are raising money for scholarships, but we see it also at your level, the college level, where people are pouring in millions of dollars, or somebody like Bill Gates that has donated, I don't know how many millions of dollars to education, sometimes a little bit of it distorted and warped because he's putting it into the public school system. But there's enough people who care that say, I'm willing to help out those that are truly in need. But that necessitates a restoration of faith and freedom, where people have faith not only in the free market, which, as you point out, produces the best of everything and always has, especially as compared to socialism, but also where people are being generous. I'd like to bring up another point, too, is that, education is a seeking process. And yet the public school system is based on a cramming process. They're going to cram information into kids' heads, and they're going to create this mindset of regimentation and deference to authority. Well, every kid to the time he's 6 years old, Richard, he is seeking knowledge. I mean, you can see it in little kids' eyes. Their eyes are wide-eyed. They're looking around. They've got this awe of the universe. They're absorbing everything they hear and everything they see. There's just this natural love of learning. And then when they learn to read, they want to read everything, and they're inquisitive. How many parents have been badgered by that infamous three-letter word? Why? It characterizes every kid. And a nice thing about a free market educational system is that it nurtures that love of learning, so that by the time a kid gets to be 18, he's still out there learning because he loves it. He loves doing what he's doing. Public school system smashes that out of kids. I mean, how many kids at 18 just want to get out of school? They hate school. They hate reading. They hate learning. That's that Army Light type of system. And so what we need to do is get back to this idea that there's something to be said about a passion for what you want to do in your life, and seeking the knowledge that you need to pursue that passion, and that's what education is truly and genuinely all about.
Well, I understand that important three-letter word, why, because I've known you for almost 40 years, and I'm wondering why.
Nice, real nice.
But I think what's important, you're here, in addition to everything else we've tried to raise, is your last point, that society has become so politicized. People have become so unthinkingly, increasingly dependent, or presuming a dependency, that government will take care of things, will take care of them, will solve problems, that too many of our fellow Americans no longer have it as the psychological default position in their own mind of, well, self-responsibility, freedom to make your own choices, and doubt as to why would we want to rely upon a government to tell me what to do and restrict my own choices and options. We've lost that. And that is part of regaining a free society, reawakening in our fellow Americans the importance of those founding principles of not just liberty, but a psychology of liberty.
All right. On that excellent note, I should also say that one of the best books we've ever published here at FFF is Separating School and State, How to Liberate America's Families by Sheldon Richman. We published it back in the 90s, but it is a timeless tract. And if you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. I should also point out that our online conference on restoring civil liberties is still going on. We had a fantastic talk by the inimitable Judge Andrew Napolitano last night. That's gone on online on our website today. So you can watch that along with all the other, I think, 8 presentations, including a great one by Richard on economic liberty and civil liberties. And so this is turning out, as I've said before, to be one of the best conferences we've ever put on. And I think it may very well be the best conference on civil liberties in the history of the libertarian movement. Next Tuesday, we've got the great Ron Paul. I mean, one of my real life heroes. And I think it'd be difficult to find a greater advocate of civil liberties than Ron Paul. And so we're really looking forward to his talk, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. You get a Zoom link by registering, and you just log on. And I think next week's going to be a very exciting one. And then we wrap things up with my final talk the following Tuesday. So I hope you'll join us. Thank you very much for tuning in, as always, and thank you for your great support. And Richard, I enjoyed the conversation, and I look forward to talking to you next week.
Until next time.